I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. The first shipment of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine arrived in Canada last night. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement on Twitter. He says while the vaccine's arrival is good news, the fight against COVID-19 isn't over, and Canadians must keep up their vigilance. The doses are bound for 14 distribution sites across the country. Meanwhile, with the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine about to arrive in this country, Health Canada has issued a warning to people with allergies. It says people who are allergic to ingredients in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine shouldn't get the shot. Health Canada's warning comes after 2 people in the UK suffered severe reactions to their inoculation but recovered. The agency says it's not recommending any changes to the product's use at this time. The federal government's bill to expand access to medically assisted dying heads to the Senate this evening. Bill C-7 passed in the House of Commons on Thursday because the Bloc Québécois and the NDP backed the bill. It will face more scrutiny and questions in the Senate, where the federal government has no control over independent-minded senators who appear determined to amend the legislation. Senator Chantal Petitclerc, who is sponsoring the bill, says she expects the debate to be passionate, intense, and thorough. An expert says a proposed revamp of the Privacy Act would impose significant new obligations on many organizations. However, Professor Teresa Sacasa says the Liberal government is unwilling to hold itself and other political parties to the same level of accountability. The law professor at the University of Ottawa says the government must improve individual privacy protection, given the sophisticated ways political parties use people's data. It was the 5th anniversary of the Paris Climate Accord on Sunday. The Prime Minister was among the leaders of more than 70 countries taking part in a virtual event. The 2015 agreement set a goal for keeping global temperatures from rising above levels that could have devastating consequences for mankind. Justin Trudeau spoke of the importance of including an ambitious climate change plan while rebuilding the pandemic-battered global economy. There are calls for the federal government to step up peacekeeping efforts. University of Ottawa professor Roland Paris, a former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, says Canada is currently doing the bare minimum. Mr. Paris does say that Canada is leading the way on initiatives designed to make peacekeeping more effective. Global Affairs Canada says the government is committed to supporting UN peacekeeping operations and is delivering on its pledges. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair says the federal government will send more Canadian Forces members to help with the Shamattawa First Nation in Manitoba fight a COVID-19 outbreak. Around 1/4 of Shamattawa's population has tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The Department of National Defence says 11 soldiers arrived in the Fly-in community in northern Manitoba last week, following the arrival of a group of Canadian Rangers. Brian Mulroney is recovering and resting at home after undergoing emergency surgery on Friday. The 81-year-old former Prime Minister was released on Sunday afternoon. The family says the urgent procedure was a complete success and no other details were released. Mr. Mulroney is the country's 18th Prime Minister in office from September 1984 to June 1993. Well, not all Canadian snowbirds are steering clear of Florida this year. Roughly 30% of older Canadian travelers are taking their chances in the Sunshine State. However, the Canadian Snowbird Association says about 70% of the 500,000 snowbirds who typically travel to Florida each year are staying home this time around. According to Martin Firestone, an insurance broker in Toronto who specializes in older travelers who need special coverage, especially against COVID-19, some of his clients feel strongly about riding out the pandemic in Florida because they don't know how many opportunities they will have. And for those grieving during the holidays, traditional Blue Christmas services offer a way to quietly mourn with the lighting of candles and prayer. But in a year where so many have lost so much, churches are trying to find ways to provide support and comfort safely. Rather than in-person gatherings, some churches are offering virtual Blue Christmas services this month on Zoom or YouTube. One Toronto reverend says people aren't just grieving the deaths of loved ones, but the loss of connection and regular activity. Wonder Woman 1984 is coming to Canadian homes on Christmas Day. Warner Brothers will debut the DC superhero flick as a video-on-demand rental the same day it launches in movie theaters. The decision comes after Warner caused a stir last month when it announced that the Gal Gadot film would only be available in Canadian movie theaters, despite many of them being closed due to COVID-19. The company hasn't specified which digital platforms will carry the film in Canada. All right, stay tuned. As Canada continues its largest immunization program in history, some Canadians are still on the fence about getting vaccinated, while others question its safeties. We talk allergies and limitations on the vaccine up next in our TIA Health medical segment with Dr. Rout. Yesterday marked the first COVID-19 inoculations in Canada, 9 months after the World Health Organization labeled the virus outbreaks across the world part of a pandemic. The initial 30,000 doses of the vaccine will be distributed at 14 sites across the 10 provinces, with a focus on frontline healthcare staff and long-term care homes. This comes as Health Canada is on the way to approving a second vaccine by U.S. biotech firm Moderna, according to Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Supriya Sharma. Canada has signed deals with 7 vaccine manufacturers to secure up to 400 million doses of vaccines if they clear clinical trials. Meanwhile, a national study by Ligier and the Association for Canadian Studies finds around 1/3 of Canadians are still hesitant when it comes to taking this vaccine. Well, joining me now in our TIA Health medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Rout, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group. Doctor, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Now, the biggest concern for most Canadians is around the vaccine safety. So how can we be sure that this treatment is safe?
I think there are some legitimate concerns of safety. The UK has discussed some issues with allergic reactions, and Health Canada has also advised of the reactions. The FDA studies have shown that only 0.63% of participants had a serious adverse reaction to the vaccine. But keep in mind, if we're talking about placebo, it was 0.51%. So overall, we're seeing an extremely small number here.
And what do we know so far about the other vaccine candidates that are in the running? I know we have one by Moderna, and it's under FDA and Health Canada review, and one by Sinopharm Beijing has already been approved in the UAE and Bahrain.
That's right. So there's a lot of news in the vaccine front for sure. Moderna is likely going to be easier in general. We know that for storage purposes, Moderna has to be stored at -30 versus Pfizer's -70. And Moderna tends to last a bit longer in the refrigerator for about 30 days compared to Pfizer's 5 days. And the FDA hasn't had any specific safety concerns with the vaccine at this time. For Sinopharm vaccine, we don't have as much public data yet as we'd like. There is a claim of an 86% effectiveness, and the UAE and Bahrain are very much interested and have approved it. And from a safety perspective, again, not too much data on our end on what adverse reactions could be for the Sinopharm vaccine.
And are the ingredients in these other COVID-19 vaccines different from the one in Pfizer and BioNTech's?
Yes. So what we'll find is every company or every company group will have its own unique ingredient profile. Now, the medicinal ingredient may be very similar in some aspects, which is the mRNA of a killed virus, but the non-medicinal ingredients are basically the ones that are the stabilizers, and that's where people can have some reactions with the stabilizers in itself, which is why we may see that some people will have reactions to one vaccine, but not necessarily the other.
And in terms of allergic reactions, we know that Health Canada told people who have allergic reactions to the ingredients in Pfizer-BioNTech's vaccines to avoid those vaccines. So where can people go to find out if they might have pre-existing conditions that could put them at a high risk of an allergic reaction?
That's a very good question. I think at this point, the best resource we can provide is basically covid-vaccine.canada.ca. Any product that would be approved in Canada for COVID, for either vaccine or even treatment, would be listed there, including their ingredients. So it'd be a good place to check if there'd be any concerns with any of the stabilizers.
And what about children under 16 years old or pregnant women? I know that they were excluded from the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine trials. So what are the guidelines around that demographic?
So that's going to be a hard one because we just don't have enough data to approve it in use. And that doesn't mean it's unsafe. It just means we don't have data. I expect as the trials expand, that'll probably change there. But the guidance here would really be to focus on preventative measures that we have in place right now. So still social distancing, washing your hands, and keeping that distance.
All right, sir. Now, we've got about 30 seconds left, sir, but the question on everyone's minds is how close are we to getting life back to normal?
I think we're a lot closer. I think there's a lot to celebrate in the news and a lot of progress there. Hopefully, this is the end of lockdowns and red zones in about 2 or 3 months there. But still, remember, we're going to have to keep the precautions, masks, washing hands, and staying 6 feet apart.
All right, sir. Thank you again for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we'll be right back with more news from this week. Up next, we take a look at Canada-China relations. Last week, the Minister of National Defence, Harjit Sajjan, told the House of Commons that Canada no longer conducts military training exercises with China. This follows questioning in the House of Commons by a Conservative defence critic who was asking about reports that indicate that Canada had been holding joint military training exercises with China 2 years ago. And now questions are circulating around Canada's role as a world power. We speak with Christian Leuprecht, professor at Royal Military College and Queen's University, after the break. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back. Last week, the Minister of National Defence, Harjit Sajjan, told the House of Commons that Canada no longer conducts military training exercises with China. The statement came after Conservative defence critic James Bazan questioned the government on the training regime that was most recently held on a Canadian military base in 2018. The same year, 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, were arrested and detained on spying charges. Their arrests have often been linked to Canada's arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou at the behest of the U.S. Mr. Sajjan claims that the training agreement was signed in 2013 under the Harper government, but Mr. Bazan argues that China was a different country at that time. A report says that General Vance, the Chief of Defense Staff, canceled a joint training exercise last year at the request of the U.S., a move that China might view as a form of retaliation, according to Global Affairs. So what does all of this mean, and how would it impact Canada's standing on the world stage? Well, joining me now is Christian Leuprecht, professor at the Royal Military College and Queen's University. Now, let's begin by discussing this training agreement. What was the purpose behind the 2013 Joint Military Agreement, sir?
So militaries regularly exercise together, even though they might not possibly be a partner or an ally. You want to build some rapport, and there's different ways of doing that, and staff colleges, exercises, or so forth. And so you need to build some sort of protocols, even with hostile countries and with adversaries, in particular, so you can de-conflict in times of tension. And so this was sort of, I guess, an effort of rapprochement and sort of a professional military-to-military relationship.
Now, General Vance's decision to cancel the exercise drew some criticism from Global Affairs. Can you unpack and explain what that means?
Yeah, I think what that means is that this file lacks serious leadership at the most senior political levels. When we have 2 departments that are essentially pursuing parallel track strategies in the regards of how they engage in China. And this, I think, is emblematic of the broader challenges Canada faces on the China file in Ottawa. It really requires the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister to provide that leadership and for everybody to take a deep breath in cabinet before we make decisions on China, so that we can make sure we can act in unison in the best interests, not just of Canada, but of course of the 2 Canadians who've now been imprisoned in hostage diplomacy for over 700 days.
Now, some critics feel that Canada is too cautious when it comes to dealing with China. So how does this speak towards our national presence in the international community?
So, look, other countries have a much more sophisticated strategy. The European Union has a strategy that recognizes that on some issues, China is a partner, on some of them a competitor, and on some an adversary. The US has that sort of nuanced strategy. Australia has that nuanced strategy. We seem to be the odd man out that we continue to try to muddle through. And I think it is not serving Canadians, Canada, or Canadian interests particularly well.
Now, as you mentioned, the Canadian military does hold joint exercises with other countries, but what makes the joint exercise with China so unique?
Well, it's a little bit tricky because, of course, the Chinese have Arctic aspirations, for instance, in particular. And so there's always sort of a fine line in terms of the extent to which you might collaborate with the military and the extent to which you, of course, don't want to share your own particular tradecraft and skill sets. And so this was, I guess, an attempt to kind of try to balance the fact that ultimately the Chinese military is a reality that we all need to live with. But clearly the changed environment meant that the Canadian Armed Forces had to make a decision that was in the best interest of Canada, and that collaboration was no longer possible under the current circumstances.
And what do you expect to be the reaction of Canadian allies, particularly those in the Five Eyes, to this information?
So Canada, of course, works fairly closely on these issues with its allies, and it's precisely that sort of relationship that then gave rise to sort of misgivings, I think, as much in Canada as elsewhere, that there needs to be a coherent military strategy in terms of engagement with China, that Canada and Canadian Armed Forces wouldn't and couldn't go it alone in terms of that relationship. And so I think it shows that in some ways there's much more coordination among Five Eyes militaries and among allied militaries when it comes to China than there is within Canada's own government, and I think that's problematic.
Well, sir, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what are the next steps for Canada to strengthen its defense against China's influence?
Well, certainly, I mean, Canada will need to be much more realistic about Chinese attempts to interfere in Canadian sovereignty and sovereign decision-making and to influence political decision-making, and that ultimately Canada will need to forge a coherent China policy, and that's ultimately going to require everybody in Ottawa to come together, and we need to manifest that in a more coherent and coordinated fashion among different ministries in how they deal with that China file, and realizing that China is the single greatest geostrategic challenge of the 21st century for Canada.
All right, sir, thank you again for your time today. We'll be right back with Dr. Dina Kulik, pediatrician and founder and director of Kid Crew, on vaccine trials for kids after the break. Stay tuned. Canada's largest immunization program in history continues as more frontline healthcare workers got inoculated with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine this week, while reports indicate that Canada is preparing to approve another promising vaccine candidate by Moderna. Now, although the release and approval for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine seems accelerated, multiple doctors, including the World Health Organization, have backed its safety and efficacy. But when we look at the clinical trials for both Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines, it's noted that the treatments were tested on adults without major medical issues, excluding those who have chronic conditions, as well as those under 16 years of age and pregnant women. Pfizer announced in October that they were expanding trials of their vaccine to those 12 and older, while last month Moderna indicated that they will test kids between 12 and 17 later this year and younger children in 2021. So what does this mean for worried parents, teachers, and children themselves as they wait for vaccines to be available to the general public? Well, joining me now is Dr. Dina Kulik, pediatrician and founder and director of Kid Crew. Dr. Dina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, why weren't children part of the initial vaccine trials?
This is common for every vaccine trial, actually. Children's immune systems are different than adult immune systems. Kids are not just little adults, as we say. Their immune systems are much more robust, and children have more risk of having vaccine reactions and side effects than adults do. So it would be typical to exclude young people as well as, people with chronic health conditions, as you spoke to, in vaccine trials until we're sure the vaccine works in the healthiest, middle age group, and then to try it on, younger people or people with health concerns.
And how do trials on children differ from the trials done on adults?
Same. It would be the same thing. It would be trying the expected dose, ideally the same dose as adults get, because it makes it easier, and seeing, do they get the same immune response that we would want? Do they have more side effects? Do they have less side effects? And then we play with that and we say, you need more doses, less doses, more frequent, less frequent, titrating that based on their response.
Have there been any cases where a vaccine works well on adults but is dangerous to kids?
Not dangerous, but we do vaccines at particular times based on how well the child's immune system works at that time. So we don't give, 1 month and 2-month-old babies all the vaccines then, because we know that the immune system takes time to develop. So they're given at specific times based on when the immune system is most able to take that vaccine and actually generate immunity for that child. That's why vaccines are spread out over years. That's why some require boosters and others don't require boosters. It's really based on how the immune system functions with each and every dose of vaccine.
And do pediatricians have any concerns around these vaccine trials when it comes to kids in terms of developmental effects?
We're not aware of any potential risk that way, but we won't know until we do those studies. Kids need to get it to see if it works, to see how long the immunity lasts, to see if they get sick from it, any side effects, and also any benefits.
And Moderna and Pfizer say that they're further separating their trials with kids. They're first going to do kids who are older than 12 years old, and then they'll move towards younger children. So what is the reason behind this approach?
The immune system of a child that's less than 12, and particularly less than 5, is very, very, very active. They're developing new exposure to things and new immunity every single time they're exposed to any virus, rash, bacteria, anything. Their immune systems are very, very robust. So it really is a unique group in terms of their immune system.
Now, considering their strong immune systems, only 1.4% of COVID-19 hospitalizations have been pediatric, according to Statistics Canada. So does this mean that it's not as urgent to get kids vaccinated?
Yes and no. It is true that children are not getting very sick or dying from COVID, but at least 15% of people that get COVID are young people, so they are certainly getting it. And they can also pass it on to their family members who are more at risk of dying or getting sick with COVID, such as their grandparents or their teachers or other people that they're exposed to.
All right, Dr. Dina, we've got about 30 seconds left, but how can we protect children during this time while we're waiting for a child-approved vaccine?
Same as protecting adults. Even if you get the vaccine today, you don't have full immunity for another month. You need another dose 3 weeks later, and only then, a week later, do you have any immunity. And we know it prevents illness in the person and not actually infection in the person. You can still get COVID and pass on COVID, maybe. So we still need to keep our distance, wear masks, wash your hands, and be cautious as we have been for the last year.
All right, Dr. Dina, again, thank you so much for your time today. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this week. Remember, for news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. You can also watch all our news and commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, have a great weekend, everybody. We'll catch you Monday.